Even years later, this case still makes Judge Caprio pause when it crosses his mind. Not because of its complexity, but because of the audacity on display that morning. He remembers her entrance clearly. She didn't walk into the courtroom. She glided in, as if the room existed for her performance. The sound of luxury heels echoed sharply across the marble floor, deliberate and confident. A high-end designer handbag rested on her arm, the kind that costs more than a courthouse employee earns in weeks. And the sunglasses, expensive, oversized, and unmistakably inappropriate, stayed on her face as she took her seat. Inside a courtroom, mid-morning, on a Tuesday, 20 minutes earlier, the clerk, Eleanor, had given a quiet warning. She stepped into chambers and said simply, "Judge, your 10:30 might be memorable. The defendant is Congressman Brennan's daughter. She arrived in a vehicle worth more than most homes." After 4 decades on Providence benches, Judge Caprio had seen privilege walk through those doors many times. Wealth, confidence, and entitlement were nothing new. But this felt different. This wasn't nervous arrogance. This was ownership. She behaved as if the courtroom were just another room she controlled. Her name was Sophia Brennan, 21 years old, the daughter of Congressman Michael Brennan, a powerful figure known nationally for speeches on accountability, public safety, and respect for the law. The contrast between his rhetoric and her behavior was impossible to ignore. That morning, she faced 3 serious charges. First-degree reckless endangerment, leaving the scene of an accident involving injury, and obstruction of justice. These were not paperwork violations. These were life-altering accusations. 2 nights earlier, her BMW had torn through a marked crosswalk in Federal Hill at nearly 50 miles per hour. An elderly woman, 82 years old, was struck and thrown to the pavement, suffering a devastating hip injury that sent her to the hospital. Witnesses watched the car slow briefly, then accelerate away. 30 minutes later, Officer Martinez located the vehicle outside a downtown nightclub. Instead of concern or remorse, the defendant pulled out her phone, began recording, and demanded special treatment. She didn't ask if the victim was alive. She didn't ask about the charges. She invoked her last name and expected it to end the conversation. It didn't. Judge Caprio had already reviewed the file twice that morning, long before court began. The victim, Mrs. Catalina Rossi, was still hospitalized at Rhode Island Hospital. 3 surgeries had already been performed. The impact had fractured her pelvis in multiple places, and doctors were unsure if she would ever regain full mobility. For more than 40 years, Mrs. Rossi had followed the same routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she crossed the same street to attend prayer at St. Bartholomew's Church. Same crosswalk, same time, a habit built over a lifetime. That night, Sophia Brennan was leaving an upscale restaurant in Federal Hill, driving well above the posted speed limit. Records showed she was distracted by her phone, messaging someone saved as Bradley, coordinating plans as she sped through a residential area. Investigators later recovered the phone from her vehicle, the unsent message still open on the screen. When Sophia finally approached the defense table that morning, she was nearly 40 minutes late. Judge Caprio greeted her calmly, but she didn't respond. She kept her sunglasses on and began typing on her phone, not in a hurry, not discreetly, as if the courtroom were irrelevant. The judge addressed her again, more firmly this time. She looked up and laughed, not out of nerves, but with open dismissal. Her comment, loud and casual, echoed through the room and landed heavily in the silence that followed. The courtroom froze. Even the background hum of the building seemed to pause. Judge Caprio kept his composure. He asked her to remove her sunglasses. She questioned the request with another short laugh and made a remark that crossed a line. The court reporter stopped typing. The bailiff shifted forward instinctively. In decades on a bench, Judge Caprio had heard every excuse imaginable, but this level of disregard was rare. He informed her that her behavior placed her in contempt of court. She challenged it openly, still smirking, as if consequences were optional. Then, without permission, she answered a ringing phone call and spoke loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. That was the moment the tone changed. When Judge Caprio spoke again, his voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that commands attention. He instructed the bailiff to intervene. She dismissed the officer with a wave, still focused on her call. Judge Caprio stood. The room shifted instantly. Conversation stopped. Eyes locked forward. Authority filled the space. When Sophia finally looked up, confidence gave way to uncertainty. Her question came out weaker than intended. The judge did not rush his response. He let the silence work. Then he spoke plainly, reminding her of the elderly woman who could no longer stand because of her actions. For the first time, something flickered behind the designer glasses. Not fear, but awareness. He gave clear instructions. Remove the glasses, put the phone away, and stand when addressed. When she hesitated, he made one thing unmistakably clear. Influence does not outweigh responsibility in his courtroom. Slowly, she stood. She slipped the phone into her purse, but the confidence she arrived with was gone. Her hand shook slightly. The sunglasses, however, stayed on. Judge Caprio addressed her evenly. This was not a discussion. It was a courtroom. With visible irritation, she pulled the glasses off and tossed them onto the table. One lens popped loose and slid across the floor. The sound echoed more loudly than it should have. When a judge finally met her eyes, what he saw wasn't defiance anymore. It was fear, genuine fear, mixed with the realization that influence might not protect her here. Her attorney attempted to step in, but the judge stopped him immediately. The behavior on display belonged to the defendant, and she would answer first. Judge Caprio opened the case file and began reading carefully. He outlined the charges one by one. Reckless endangerment, medical records confirming severe injuries, emergency surgery, followed by multiple additional procedures. Each word landed heavier than the last. Her complexion drained as the details continued. Investigators confirmed the force of the impact had thrown the victim a significant distance, causing multiple fractures beyond the initial injury. The judge turned the page. Leaving the scene, the report showed she kept driving block after block, without stopping, without calling for help, without checking if the person she struck was alive. She tried to interrupt. The judge raised his hand. Then came the final charge. Obstruction. The officer's report documented repeated attempts to invoke family status, recorded statements suggesting the incident would be made to disappear, and efforts to intimidate law enforcement during the stop. She denied it weakly. Judge Caprio read directly from the report, word for word. The room went still. Her attorney shifted uneasily. The weight of the record was undeniable. He asked her plainly if she had made those statements. Her response was quiet now. She claimed fear, confusion. The judge did not accept it. He explained that fear does not excuse attempting to avoid responsibility, especially after causing serious harm and leaving the scene. That was when the tears came. Not composed, not controlled. The kind that arrive when reality finally breaks through entitlement. She begged quietly, afraid of consequences, afraid of exposure. Judge Caprio remained steady. He reminded her that the matter was already public, that the victim's family deserved transparency, and that accountability does not disappear because it is inconvenient. She stood there crying, the courtroom silent around her, repeating the same word under her breath. Judge, when you're ready, send the next section, and I'll continue rewriting it piece by piece, exactly to your rules. She whispered his name again, offering anything she could, desperate to keep the case from spreading further. Judge Caprio closed the file and explained calmly that the harm was already public. The moment someone is injured and influence is used to avoid responsibility, privacy disappears. She broke down in her chair as the weight of it finally settled. The judge reminded her that her father speaks often about justice. Today, she would learn what those words mean without protection. Her apologies followed, but Caprio corrected her. Regret after consequences is not the same as accountability. He struck the gavel and delivered the decision. Guilty on every charge. The sentence was clear. Jail time suspended, conditional on strict compliance. Community service inside a hospital rehabilitation unit. A written apology. License revoked. Counseling required. full financial responsibility for medical care. When she said she couldn't afford it, the judge made it clear that responsibility is not optional. Any failure would activate the suspended sentence. As she was escorted out, she asked if he would tell her father she was sorry. Caprio answered simply, that was her responsibility. Calls followed in the weeks after. Each was declined. The ruling stood. 2 months later, a handwritten letter arrived. It began with his name. The letter said Mrs. Rossi was walking again. Her family had allowed a visit. During it, Mrs. Rossi asked what had been learned from everything that happened. The answer was simple. A name doesn't excuse harm, money doesn't erase consequences, and status doesn't cancel responsibility. She wrote that fixing damage matters more than running from it. Community service was still ongoing, but for the first time in her life, the work felt meaningful. Helping in the rehabilitation unit showed her what real recovery looks like: patience, pain, and persistence. She had taken a job to help cover medical costs. No one there knew her background. They only knew she arrived on time and worked hard. That alone felt new. The letter thanked the court for refusing to let the case quietly disappear. Accountability, she wrote, forced growth where comfort never had. Forgiveness, Mrs. Rossi told her, wasn't forgetting. It was believing people could rise above their worst moment. Years later, the judge kept that letter. Mrs. Rossi recovered and returned to her routines, slower now, but steady. The two remained in touch, no longer connected by obligation, but by choice. Watching them together once, it was clear the lesson had landed. Respect isn't inherited, bought, or demanded. It's earned quietly through actions. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about removing the safety net and letting someone finally learn who they are without it. Her father never called again about interfering with the sentence. But word spread that he now referenced his daughter's story in speeches on accountability. Not to excuse her actions, but to illustrate what real consequences and real redemption look like. He never named me, but people pieced it together. The story didn't just affect him. Defendants began taking charges seriously, understanding that privilege couldn't erase responsibility. 6 months later, a senator's son appeared in my court for a DUI. Respectful, remorseful, ready to face the consequences. His lawyer confided that the Brennan case had set the example. No one is above the law. Change happens quietly, one person at a time. Learning that actions matter, titles don't excuse misbehavior, and true strength comes from owning your mistakes. Mrs. Rossi still bakes bread every Sunday. Sophia visits, law books in hand, helping with the dough, and listening to stories of respect, family, and the difference between being important and being good. Last week, she even brought her boyfriend, a young man who didn't know her father and didn't care. He saw her volunteering, baking bread, and learning lessons money couldn't buy. She's different now, Mrs. Rossi said. Before, she saw obstacles or opportunities. Now she sees people. That is justice, not punishment, not revenge. Simply teaching someone to see others as humans, not tools or obstacles.